If anyone asked me what the coldest moment of my life was, I wouldn't talk about sickness or old age. I'd talk about that night, my 63rd birthday, when my only son, surrounded by the laughter of our family, whispered in my ear, "Hope it's the last candle you ever blow out. I hope this is the last candle you ever blow out, Dad." I kept smiling, looking around, pretending I hadn't understood the whisper that had just shattered my soul. They say pain has a shape. That night, mine was the shape of a small candle flickering in the middle of a crowded room. The light in the room illuminated the face of Jessica, my daughter-in-law, a woman who always laughed too loud and talked more than necessary. She poured wine into my glass with a smile as bright as the gold ring on her hand. "Happy birthday, father-in-law," she said. Everyone clapped. Daniel, my son, smiled too, with that forced smile of someone who's only doing it out of obligation. In his hand, there wasn't a glass, but his phone. I knew exactly who he was writing to. Maybe a business partner, maybe the same woman he believed was the pride of his life. I looked around. Those familiar but distant faces. The cake in the center of the table, the lit candles, the children running and laughing. That atmosphere, which had once made me happy, now just smelled of falsehood. When Jessica started to sing "Happy Birthday to You," I smiled. I did it just like all those years I'd learned to hide, behind a smile, the emptiness growing inside me. And then, just as I leaned in to blow out the candles, I heard that sentence. It wasn't loud or clear, but every syllable stabbed me cleanly. "Hope this is the last candle he ever blows out." I didn't turn my head. I just stared at the small, trembling flame in front of me. My whole life I had taught my son how to turn on the light, and that day he was wishing I'd turn mine off for good. I took a deep breath and blew softly. The flame vanished instantly, leaving a thin line of smoke that rose like the soul of all good things fading away. Everyone clapped, shouted, celebrated. Jessica kissed my cheek. Daniel clinked his glass in an empty toast. I kept smiling, but my gaze settled on him, on the son I once believed was my continuation. "My wish already came true," I murmured in a deep, serene, strangely calm voice. "You'll find out tomorrow." Daniel frowned, not understanding. I just smiled and poured myself more wine. Amidst the music and congratulations, I felt the silence inside me, so profound I could hear my own heart beating. When everyone turned to talk, I looked at the extinguished candle. A drop of wax fell onto the center of the white plate, marking a final period. That night, I knew that what I had just blown out wasn't just a candle. It was the last illusion of a love I thought was eternal. And I understood, with the clarity of someone who is no longer afraid, that there are some wishes that, when spoken, really do come true. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments below. The house, after the party, smelled like old wine and melted wax. I cleared the table calmly, glass by glass, piece by piece of cake, as if I were saying goodbye to the last fragments of a life of trust. Outside, the night wind slipped through the crack in the door and made the white curtain that Helen, my wife, had sewn with her own hands tremble. 8 years since she's been gone, but tonight, in that silence, I felt she was there, in some dark corner, watching me without a word. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the liquor Helen always said was too bitter, and sat in my usual spot, the chair she used to call the stubborn old man's lonely throne. I hadn't even brought the glass to my lips when I looked up at the photo on the wall. Helen was still smiling, with that look that was both sweet and strong. I clearly remembered the morning before she passed, her thin hand squeezing mine, weak but firm. "Promise me, Arthur, you won't let our son get lost. Even if it hurts, love him one more time." I promised. But tonight, after Daniel's words, that promise weighed on my chest like a stone. I love him. I have loved him to the point of blindness, to the point where he forgot that I also know what it is to suffer. When he was a boy, Daniel used to sleep in my arms and tell me, "I want to grow up fast to protect you, Dad." He's grown up all right, but now the only thing he protects is his own pride. I got up and walked down the long hallway. Every photograph on the wall was a piece of the past. Daniel in his first school uniform, Helen holding a bouquet of daisies on her birthday. The three of us together in the wood shop. I stopped in front of the last picture, the three of us smiling under the newly planted lemon tree. Helen used to say, "As long as this tree bears fruit, our family will have love." If the tree bloomed, love was still alive. I opened the door to the yard. The moonlight filtered onto the dry leaves. The lemon tree was still there, old, dried out, with bare branches. I ran my hand over its rough bark. It was like touching a memory that had already gone cold. There were no flowers, no fruit, just the gray, cold trunk. "Helen, your tree has died," I whispered, but deep down, I knew I was the one who had let it die. Back in the room, I sat at the desk and opened the drawer to take out an old notebook. Between the yellowed pages was a card Helen wrote me on her last birthday. "To my stubborn old man, who never gives up, don't forget that loving is also teaching how to let go. Loving is also daring to let go." I closed the notebook. My son's words echoed in my mind like an open wound. Hope this is the last candle he ever blows out. Maybe he was right. Maybe this really was the last candle. But if I had to blow it out, it would be on my own terms. I looked out the window. The moonlight fell on the desk like a strip of icy silver. "You were right, Helen," I murmured. "The time has come to teach him one more time," but with silence. And I downed the whiskey in one gulp, letting the harsh fire burn down my throat. That final fire, still burning in a man who no longer needed to be understood. The next morning, I woke just as the sun was filtering through the window. The house was so quiet I could hear the tired ticking of the wall clock. I made coffee, as I had for decades, but the bitter aroma turned my stomach. On the table, the whiskey glass from the night before still sat, and on the wood, a stain of dried wax, the trace of everything left unsaid. I sat down, and as if pulled back by time, I remembered when Daniel was a kid. He was about 8 years old, hands full of sawdust and eyes shining like two little flames. He loved to sit with me in the wood shop, watching me measure, saw, and chisel each piece of wood. "Dad," he asked once, "does wood get tired? Why do you always stroke it before you work on it?" I laughed, ruffling his hair. "Of course it gets tired, son. Everything gets tired, even your dad. But if you treat it with kindness, it will give you the most beautiful thing it has." The boy nodded seriously and picked up a small piece of wood, carefully trying to imitate my movements. In those years, the woodshop was our world. Helen used to stand in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron and joking. "You two turned the house into a forest again." I remember her laugh, the afternoon sun on Daniel's face, as he proudly showed me his first chair. But that very chair was the beginning of the distance between us. One afternoon, I came home late from work, exhausted. Daniel, who was 15, wanted to surprise me. He had sawed the wood and hammered the nails himself to finish his first chair. But when I sat on it, the chair split in two. The sharp crack echoed through the shop. My back ached, and rage blinded me. "What did you do, Daniel? You never listen to what I tell you." My voice cracked like a whip. I didn't see the tears in his eyes, only the fear. The boy trembled and ran off, leaving behind the broken pieces and that look that still haunts me. That night, Helen was silent. She only said one thing. "You taught him to be afraid, not to be responsible." I didn't answer. I thought she was right, that a son had to learn through error, but I forgot that some errors are corrected with a hug, not with yelling. From that day on, Daniel came to the woodshop less. When I was working, he would just stand in the doorway, watching in silence, until one afternoon he murmured, "I'm going to learn to work with my head, not with my hands like you." At the time, it sounded like determination. Today, it sounds like distance. From then on, he no longer wanted to be like me. Years later, when Helen got sick, I sat by her bed and held her frail hand. In a halting voice, she said, "Remember the broken chair? You lost your son that day." I smiled sadly. And now, sitting in this empty house, I understand she was right. That fracture wasn't just in the wood. It was the invisible break that separated 2 generations. And all these years, I've kept sitting on that broken piece, trying to convince myself it's still whole. After a morning soaked in memories, I opened the door to the woodshop. The smell of old wood, varnish, and the dust of time filled the air like an echo of the years. Every chisel strike, every saw cut that had once been the language between father and son, now just resonated like ghosts. I sat at the workbench, its edges worn, and ran my hand over the scratched surface. In one corner, you could still read a shaky inscription, "For my dad, from his son Daniel." He had carved it at 10 years old, when I was still his whole world. I closed my eyes and let the wind coming through the door mix with the memory. Helen left 8 years ago, but on heavy days like this, I still hear her voice floating through the house. "Arthur, don't let the silence kill everything you love." But I did let it, not because I stopped loving, but because I didn't know how to do it anymore after she was gone. When Helen was in the hospital, Daniel was 25. He started visiting less and less, always with the excuse of work. I understood. He was afraid to watch her fade, but that fear turned into distance. The night Helen died, I stayed by her side until dawn, holding her hand as it slowly grew cold. Daniel stood in the doorway. He didn't cry. He just stared into the void with an expression I couldn't decipher. I called his name, but he turned and left. As the hearse pulled away, he murmured in a hoarse voice, "Dad, you should have let Mom rest sooner. She was suffering because you wouldn't let her go." I didn't answer. I knew he didn't understand, but I didn't have the strength to explain. Since then, the house filled with clocks and wind. There were no more conversations, only silences. Daniel hardly ever came by, and when he did, he spoke like a stranger. "Dad, you should sell the wood shop. Nobody does woodwork by hand anymore. You should hire someone to take care of you. It's not safe to live alone." I would just nod. I knew that behind those words wasn't concern, but calculation. But what hurt most wasn't that. It was not recognizing my own son's voice. He spoke with the cold politeness of a stranger. One night, I opened Helen's closet. Among photographs and scarves, I found a small notebook. On the first page, it said, "Diary for when you forget how to love." She had written, "Arthur, you always believed loving was protecting. But if you only protect and don't talk, love turns to stone. Daniel needs to hear you, not just see you." I read those lines over and over, and my throat tightened. I had thought silence was a way of keeping the peace, but it turned out to be what slowly unraveled everything. That night, I tried to call Daniel. The phone rang 3 times and cut off. I left the phone on the table and looked at the small candle in the glass jar Helen had left. The wick was short, the light weak, but it was still burning. "Son, I'm not mad at you. I just regret that we let our love go silent." Outside, the wind carried the damp smell of earth. It was going to rain. I slowly closed the window, my heart heavy. Maybe that's the cruelest part of old age, not the loneliness, but knowing you loved the wrong way and there's no time left to say it right. Jessica appeared in Daniel's life like a breeze scented with orange blossom, soft but cold. The first time my son brought her home, Helen was still alive. I remember that afternoon perfectly. The sunlight streamed through the window, wood dust floated in the air, and Daniel, with a pride I'd never seen in him before, said, "Dad, this is Jessica." The young woman wore an ivory-colored suit. She smiled skillfully and had bright eyes, though they held no warmth. Helen, standing next to me, squeezed my hand slightly. It was her way of warning me when she had a bad feeling about something. During dinner, Jessica talked a lot, with confidence and a certain vanity. "I work in marketing," she said. "Everyone needs to know how to sell their image these days." Daniel smiled and chanted. I, on the other hand, stayed quiet, watching how she stirred the small spoon in her coffee cup. Every gesture seemed calculated. After the meal, Jessica approached me. Her voice was as smooth as the aroma of wine. "Your house is beautiful, Arthur, though a bit old-fashioned." It sounded like a compliment, but the word old-fashioned cut like a thin blade. This house, this wood shop, they were my whole life, Helen's breath. And to her, it was all just something old. That night, Helen told me, "I'm not worried that she's bad. I'm worried that she doesn't know how to appreciate." I smiled awkwardly. "As long as our son is happy, it's fine." She looked at me with a serene sadness. "Arthur, Happiness isn't in glamour, but in gratitude. When Helen died, the emptiness of the house was quickly filled by Jessica's voice, her footsteps, and her strong perfume. She began to speak for Daniel in everything. "Your father needs to rest, honey. Don't bother him with your business. It's better for him to live quietly, away from the noise." Sweet words like honey, but with a hidden blade. Every sentence was one more line drawn between Daniel and me. My son, absorbed in his work and drunk on the illusion of success she painted for him, didn't see a thing. I understood that Jessica didn't come to destroy, but to possess. She wanted it all. Daniel, his name, and also what belonged to me. And I, instead of confronting her, chose silence. Partly out of exhaustion, partly because of the promise I made to Helen. Even if he changes, love him one more time. But I never imagined that my silence would push him even further away. One night, Daniel called me, his voice brief. "Dad, Jessica is right. You should sell the woodshop. At your age, you need to rest." "You want to sell my memories, son?" I asked. On the other end, I only heard a sigh. The call ended with a "good night, cold as steel." I went out to the yard. The moon illuminated the dry branches of the old lemon tree. The wind moved them gently. In that murmur, I thought I heard Helen whisper, "Don't let silence become surrender." And I answered her, almost in a whisper, "I haven't given up, Helen. I'm just waiting for the right time to speak." A few weeks later, Daniel came to the house. He hadn't shown up unannounced in a long time. I was in the woodshop when I heard the sound of the car stopping at the gate. The door slammed hard, and his footsteps echoed hurriedly. "Dad!" His voice sounded cold, urgent. I wiped my hands on my apron and went out. He was in the middle of the yard, wearing a white shirt, black shoes, and carrying a leather briefcase. Looking at him, I saw a successful man, not the boy who used to laugh until he cried when he got wood glue on his fingers. "I have something to tell you," he said curtly. I nodded and invited him in. In the kitchen, the aroma of coffee was spreading, but he didn't accept a cup. He just opened the briefcase and took out some documents. "Dad," I spoke with Jessica. "We want you to transfer the house and the woodshop land to my name. It's easier to secure the assets that way. If anything happens," I interrupted him. "And what could happen, Daniel?" He hesitated for a moment, then he smiled coldly. "You're older now. We have to plan ahead, avoid future problems." I looked him in the eyes. There was no warmth, only the logic and fear of someone who has stopped believing in affection. "You want to secure the future?" I asked. "I just want everything in order," he replied, his voice hard. "Jessica is right. You should rest and let us take care of everything." I sat down slowly. "I've worked my whole life to build this house, this woodshop. Not for the land or the money, but because your mother's scent is still here, the years when we were truly a family. How, in order, do you want everything? To the point of erasing the memories?" Daniel frowned. "You always talk about the past, Dad. That time is gone. The world has changed. Today you don't live on feelings but on efficiency." I stayed silent, letting his words fall like splinters. "Maybe you're right, son," I said at last. "I'm from another time. I believe in something almost no one remembers anymore. Respect." He shrugged. "Respect doesn't pay the bills." That sentence was colder than the wind. I stood up and walked over to him. "You think I'm afraid of losing this? No, I just regret that you never understood its real value." Daniel looked around, his gaze lost. "You don't get it, Dad. I just want to protect the family legacy." I laughed without force, a dry laugh. "Protect it by taking it from me?" In the small house, the ticking of the clock sounded like a knife striking a heart. Finally, he put the papers away, his voice lower, though still icy. "You don't understand. Jessica just wants to help. So do I. I don't want to argue. Think about the future, Dad." I watched him leave, his shoulders tense with pride, but with a look that almost broke. He didn't kiss me goodbye. When the sound of the engine faded, I went back to the woodshop and sat in the old chair. Under my feet, the wood shavings glowed in the afternoon light. I picked one up. I sanded it gently. My hand was shaking, but it was still steady. "Son, I'm not mad," I whispered. "I'm just hurt that you learned everything except dignity." Outside, the wind passed through the dry branches of the lemon tree. A single leaf fell to the ground. I didn't know if it was the end or the beginning of a new storm. That night the rain fell without stopping. The sky seemed split in two by thunder and the smell of wet earth. I sat in the woodshop, the yellow light falling on the workbench, listening to the patter of drops on the tin roof. Each one sounded heavy, as if marking the beat of an old sadness. The conversation with Daniel from that morning came back again and again, his cold words, his empty arguments. I thought I was used to the loneliness, but tonight was different. Loneliness smelled like rust, sounded like rain, and had the face of a woman who was gone. I opened the old drawer where Helen used to keep everything. Some photos, threads, small scraps of paper with recipes. An old scent enveloped me, aged paper and a touch of lavender, her favorite fragrance. Among the papers, a small envelope fell to the floor, tied with a faded blue ribbon. On the front, her slanted, soft handwriting. For you, when you don't know what to do. For you, when you don't know what to do. I froze, not daring to open it. My hands were shaking, as if I were touching something sacred. After a moment, I carefully untied the ribbon. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, the ink blurred in some places, as if tears themselves had written part of the message. My Arthur, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm no longer with you. Don't be afraid of the loneliness, because it will teach you to talk to yourself. You've always been strong, but sometimes strength is also a way of hiding. You think silence is peace, but being too quiet turns love to stone. Daniel is like you, stubborn, proud, unable to show what he feels. If he hurts you one day, don't respond with anger, but with memory. Remember the boy who believed his father could fix anything. And if he ever forgets you, don't beg him to remember. Let him fall. Only when you hit the bottom can you look up at the light. I stopped. My eyes were burning. Each word was another wound, but also a wound that brought me back to life. Helen had seen it all, long before. Our son's coldness, my silence. This exact moment, me sitting here, surrounded by rain and regrets. I folded the letter carefully and left it on the table. Outside, the thunder continued, but the rain sounded softer. I looked out the window. The lemon tree in the yard trembled under the wind. Its dark, wet trunk looked bare, helpless. I went outside. The cold water chilled me to the bone, but I felt strangely lucid. I put my hand on the trunk and whispered, "You were right, Helen. Maybe it's time to let him fall so he can learn to look up." Back in the woodshop, I lit a small candle on the table. The flickering light reflected on the paper, revealing one last line I hadn't read. And when that time comes, don't act out of spite. Do it for justice. Because loving also means knowing how to set boundaries. I barely smiled, my tears mixing with the sound of the rain. Inside me, something woke up. It wasn't anger, it was determination. I blew out the candle, letting the smoke dance around the letter. In that light mist, I clearly heard Helen's voice, soft but firm. "It's time, Arthur. You know what to do." The rain didn't stop all night. It wasn't heavy, just constant, persistent, like an old melody that refuses to fade. The house was wrapped in a dim yellow light from the kitchen lamp. I sat at the table. In front of me, Helen's letter, carefully folded, a cup of cold coffee, and a burnt-out candle. I read the last sentence again, almost faded in the light. Loving also means knowing how to set boundaries. Loving, sometimes, is knowing where surrender ends. I finally understood. For years I believed that being silent was loving, that giving in was preserving. But the truth was different. That silent resignation had turned love into a burden. Daniel never learned responsibility because I never made him face the consequences of his actions. Helen hadn't just left me a letter, but a mirror. In it, I could see that even kindness needs borders. I got up and walked to the small room in the back where the old chest rested, untouched since Helen's death. Every time I passed it, I avoided looking in the mirror because that reflection showed me older, weaker, more alone. But tonight was different. I turned the key, and the sharp click of the lock resonated like the beginning of something irreversible. Inside was everything that remained of my life. The deeds to the house, the woodshop license, the savings passbook, some property titles frayed at the edges, and a handful of family photographs. I took them all out and lined them up on the table. The lamplight reflected off the dust, shining like tiny sparks on the lost years. On the wall, the clock marked its rhythm, and I thought that maybe the time had come to stop letting time decide for me. I found a black notebook, the one where I used to write down old contracts. Now it was almost empty. Only a few blank pages remained. I opened it and wrote with a steady hand the first line. Today, it all begins. I picked up the phone and dialed Robert's number, an old friend, the one I built the first door frames with when we were young. The ringing was long. After the third ring, his hoarse, sleepy voice answered. Arthur? Yeah, it's me. What's wrong, old friend? Everything okay? I looked out the window. A flash of lightning crossed the sky and reflected on the dark, bare trunk of the lemon tree. The time has come, Robert. I need to see you tomorrow, at your office. I hung up without explaining further. For the first time in many years, I felt my heart beat strongly, not with fear, but with the knowledge that I was alive. I put all the documents in a worn leather briefcase and left it on the chair. Outside, the rain grew more intense. I went out on the porch and watched the drops hit the bricks, bursting into tiny sparkles. The wind was cold, but inside me, something was beginning to burn. It wasn't resentment, it was dignity. I looked up at the sky and murmured, Do you hear me, Helen? I'm not looking for revenge, but I will claim justice. My way. I went back inside and blew out the last candle on the table. In that instant, the white smoke rose, fragile as a promise, and in that spiral of smoke, amid the murmur of the rain, I thought I heard Helen's voice, so soft it seemed like the wind. That's right, Arthur. Now justice begins. The next morning, the sky was still covered in gray clouds. I left the house as the city was still waking up, carrying the old leather briefcase that held all the papers of a lifetime. The street, still damp from the night's rain, reflected the yellowish lights of the street lamps like distorted memories. Every step I took was a strike of determination, although a fear remained inside me. A slight tremor. Not of fear, but of knowing I was about to cut the last thread tying me to that name. Father. Robert's office was in an old building downtown. I hadn't set foot in that place in almost 10 years. The dark wood door, the worn metal plaque, everything was the same, and the inside smelled the same. Paper, coffee, and time. When I walked in, Robert looked up. His eyes widened in surprise and then lit up, as if he were seeing a ghost. Arthur, my goodness, I thought the world had forgotten you. I smiled slightly. It almost did. But it seems the world doesn't forget me that easily. My old friend stood up and hugged me, squeezing my shoulders hard. In that hug, there was surprise, compassion, and a silent respect. We sat. Several minutes passed without speaking, just the ticking of the clock filling the space. Finally, Robert broke the silence. Why today, old friend? I put the briefcase on the desk, opened it, and let the documents spread out in front of him. Deeds, woodshop licenses, savings passbooks, policies, certificates. Because I don't want to die empty-handed, I said slowly. Not empty of money, empty of dignity. Robert frowned. This has to do with Daniel, doesn't it? I nodded. I told him everything. The birthday, my son's venomous words, Helen's letter. Robert didn't interrupt, just listened, and his gaze grew sadder with every sentence. When I finished, he sighed and asked in a low voice, What are you planning to do? I looked him straight in the eye, firmly. Transfer everything, the house, the woodshop, the accounts, all of it into a trust. Daniel won't touch a single dollar, but the grandkids, they will inherit. Robert leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. You know this will destroy him, don't you? I don't want to destroy him, I replied. I want to wake him up. He nodded slowly. I get it. You're not looking for revenge. You're teaching the last lesson. I smiled. Helen said it. Let him fall so he can learn to look at the sky. The time has come. We started reviewing the documents. Robert, as meticulous as ever, read every figure, every small line in the margin. Luckily, you haven't signed over the deed yet, he commented. Everything is still in your name. We just need to reorganize it legally. I exhaled with relief, though I felt a bitter pang. Every signature I stamped was like an incision, separating me, bit by bit, from the past. When we finished, Robert poured 2 cups of coffee. He watched me with a mix of seriousness and affection. "I don't know if this is the right path, Arthur, but I know one thing. You've found yourself again." I replied in a gravelly voice, "Maybe late, but better late than never." As I left, I stood under the building's awning, watching a light drizzle start up again. Inside me, something was closing, but something else was opening. I looked up at the silver sky and murmured, "See, Helen? I'm not looking for revenge. I'm just serving justice." A raindrop hit my forehead, icy. I wiped it away with my hand and smiled, tired, but at peace. For the first time in many years, I felt like I was truly breathing. That night I couldn't sleep right away. The house was unusually silent. Only the faint murmur of the rain sliding off the roof remained. I sat on the bed and opened the window to let in the early morning air. The smell of wet earth mixed with the scent of damp wood from the old woodshop. It smelled like a memory, something warm and painful at the same time. On the table, the briefcase with the documents from Robert's office was still there. Closed, heavy as a whole life I had just learned to let go of. I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes. Then, sleep came, light as smoke. In it, I saw Daniel as a boy, running barefoot through the woodshop, laughing as I lifted him up to hang the Miller woodworking sign. Helen was in the doorway, hands on her hips, a radiant smile on her face. "Look at him, he's your reflection," she'd say, laughing. I felt that immense pride again when Daniel, his eyes shining, asked me, "Dad, does wood have a soul too?" And I answered him, "Of course it does, son. The soul is wherever you put your heart." He let out a pure laugh, as clear as the sound of 2 planks striking each other. The dream changed color. I saw Helen in the yard, her hands covered in dirt, planting a small lemon tree. "When this tree grows, our son will grow too. As long as it blossoms, our family will have love," she said. I knelt to help her cover the roots, and little Daniel ran toward us, sticking a blade of grass in the dirt. "So the tree has hair, Mom." Helen laughed heartily, her eyes shining like the sun. The scene was so vivid I could hear the cicadas singing and smell the scent of fresh lemon in the air. But slowly, the dream turned dark. The lemon tree was dry, the ground cracked. I saw Daniel as an adult, standing in front of me in a dark room. He had a phone in his hand and his voice was icy. "Dad, Jessica is right. It's time to change. You should rest." I looked at him, searching his eyes for a trace of the boy he used to be, but there was nothing left. I wanted to get closer, to hug him, but my feet were nailed to the floor. I wanted to tell him, "I still love you," but the voice choked in my throat. I woke with a start. The moon was filtering through the clouds. The clock read 4 in the morning. I stayed motionless, listening to my heartbeat, feeling like the dream hadn't quite dissolved. I poured a glass of water and went out on the porch. The lemon tree stood motionless in the dim light. The night's rain had washed the dust from its trunk. I approached and rested my hand on the rough bark. Under the faint moonlight, I saw on one of its dry branches a tiny bud, pale green and trembling. I stood still. Maybe it was just an illusion or a trick of the light, but I felt a sudden warmth in my chest. I gently stroked the small bud and smiled. "Still alive? Well done, little guy." I sat in the old wooden chair on the porch. The dawn breeze carried a faint scent of lemon. I remembered a line from Helen's letter. "When everything seems dead, look closely. Life always tries to come back." I looked up at the sky. The rain had stopped. Only a few drops fell from the eaves with a rhythmic sound. I felt my soul lighten. That dream wasn't a warning, but a reminder. Love doesn't die. It just sleeps, waiting to be awakened at the right time. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that this morning would be the beginning of what I had promised Helen. Teaching my son the last lesson with the combined light of justice and love. 3 days later, the sky dawned an unusually clear blue. I decided to call Daniel. On the other end of the line, his voice sounded surprised and cautious. "You want to see me, Dad?" "Yes," I replied. "Just a family lunch. I'll cook." I heard him say something quietly to Jessica, and then he replied, All right, we'll come. Brief, cold, but enough. I started preparing everything early. I cleaned the china Helen had cherished. I opened the windows to let the light in. I bought wine, steak, and toasted bread, just as she used to on special days. In the kitchen, I had the feeling she was watching me, guiding my every move. When I placed a small bouquet of flowers in the center of the table and a petal fell, I murmured, "See, Helen, today I'm ending this silence, my way." At 12 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Jessica came in first, leaving a strong perfume in her wake and a gaze that scanned the house like someone appraising a property. "What a lovely table, Arthur," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel followed, impeccable in his white shirt and tight tie, smiling tiredly. "Didn't think you still remembered how to cook, Dad." "There are some things you don't forget. You just store them away," I replied. The kids were running through the living room, laughing, filling the house with a noise that felt miraculous. I watched them, and for a moment, my soul softened. They didn't understand the cracks between the adults yet, and maybe they were the only reason I still had the strength to be there. We sat at the table. Jessica hurried to pour the wine. "I want to make a toast to you, Arthur," she said, "to keeping in good spirits in your retirement." Daniel nodded with a forced smile. "Listen to Jessica, Dad. It's time for you to rest. Let me handle the work." I looked at them both and replied calmly, "You're right. Resting is necessary, especially when you've already finished everything you needed to do." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Finished everything?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Everything is finally in its place." I got up, walked to the shelf, and picked up a brown envelope. Inside were the documents signed the morning before. I placed it in front of Daniel. "Before we eat, I have a small gift for you." He frowned, opened the envelope, and began to read. His face changed slowly, from curiosity to confusion and then to disbelief. "What is this, Dad?" I sat down and spoke calmly. "The result of all my years of work, the house, the wood shop, the accounts. Everything has been transferred to a trust. The only beneficiaries will be your children." Jessica shot up from her seat, her voice as sharp as a razor. "What? That can't be. Daniel, say something." Daniel gripped the envelope tightly. "Dad, is this a joke? You can't do this. This all belongs to the family." I looked at him steadily. "And what does family mean, son? Taking what isn't yours yet and forgetting the one who gave you everything?" A heavy silence fell. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard. The children looked confused. Jessica tried to speak, but I raised my hand. "Don't worry. No one will be left destitute. You'll still have a future. You'll just have to earn it for yourselves this time." Daniel slammed the envelope on the table. "You're destroying me, Dad," I replied, serene but firm. "No, I'm saving you. From your own ambition and from your pride." Jessica was pale. "You're going to regret this, Arthur." I smiled and poured more wine. "Maybe. But today, for the first time in many years, I feel like I'm living rightly." The air grew thick. The red wine in the glasses looked like congealed blood. Daniel remained silent, his gaze fixed on the envelope. I, on the other hand, looked toward the yard where the children were laughing, oblivious. I thought that maybe that day the old lemon tree would once again hear the genuine laughter of the family. After my last words, lunch fell into absolute silence. The sound of silverware against the plates became metallic, as if scratching at the heart. Jessica was the first to get up. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you just say, Arthur? Are you planning to leave us with nothing?" I didn't answer. I just looked at Daniel, waiting, for the last time, for one sincere word from this son in whom I had placed so many years of hope. But he just shook his head and let out a hollow, broken laugh. "You really did this, Dad? After everything?" I nodded slowly. "I haven't taken anything from you, Daniel. I've only given what's left to those who still have a future. Your children." Jessica slammed the table with her open palm. "This is insane. He can't do that. Everything should belong to Daniel. He's your son." "Yes," I replied serenely, without looking away. "My son. But he forgot how to be a man." Daniel shot up. The chair fell backward. "What do you want from me, Dad? To humiliate me?" "No," I answered calmly. "I want you to remember who you are." His eyes turned red. And you teach me that by destroying my life? No, Daniel. I'm teaching you that respect isn't a gift. It's an obligation. Jessica turned to me, her voice trembling. Don't you realize? You're destroying your family. Daniel has done everything to preserve your legacy. I smiled tiredly. My legacy isn't in these walls, Jessica. It's in honor. And that, you two sold off a long time ago. She was about to retort, but Daniel raised a hand. Enough, Jessica. That phrase surprised me. In his eyes, there was something different, not just fury, fear too. Dad, please, don't turn this into a battlefield. I sighed. I didn't start this battle, son. It started the day you let contempt replace affection. The air thickened, dense as smoke. I stood up. I walked to the table and filled my glass one more time. Drink? I said. Let's toast. To the truth, even if it hurts. Daniel didn't touch his glass. Jessica wiped her tears, her lips pressed tight. Outside, the sky was darkening and the clouds were piling up, heavy as lead. I drank the wine in one gulp. I felt the fire go down my throat, but a strange peace reigned inside me. I don't need you to love me, I said slowly. I just need you to learn this. You can lose everything, be left with nothing, but if you keep your dignity, you're still whole. Daniel looked at me for a long time. In his eyes, I saw the reflection of my youth, stubbornness, pride, and the willingness to suffer before backing down. He said no more. He folded the envelope, put it in his pocket, and turned around. Jessica followed him, her heels striking the floor with fury. When the door slammed shut, the house was empty, echoing only the ticking of the clock. I sat down again. The untouched plates, the cold meat, the wine spilled on the table, forming a dark stain. The centerpiece candle flickered and went out. I lit a cigarette. The smoke burned my eyes. Outside, the storm wind began to roar, whipping the curtains. I got up and threw the windows wide open. The rain burst in, fresh and violent. I looked toward the lemon tree, its trunk soaked, trembling in the downpour. A final leaf broke free and fell onto the wet bricks. It's over, Helen, I whispered. The storm has arrived, but I'm not afraid anymore. Between the flashes of lightning, I understood that there was no anger or sadness left, only a pure and definitive feeling. Freedom. The house, after lunch, was so empty you could hear the wind filtering through the window frames. I didn't clear the table or turn on the lights. The glasses were still scattered, the plates cold, the smell of wine mixed with extinguished wax. Everything remained as it was when they left, except for one thing. There was no human breath left. I stood in the middle of the dining room, listening to the ticking of the clock, each tick like a knife twist. Every second reminded me that from that moment on, I was truly alone. I poured more wine and drank straight from the bottle. It was bitter, but it didn't burn anymore. Maybe my tongue had gotten used to the pain. I sat and looked at the open envelope on the table. A few drops of wine had stained the paper's edge. On the wood, the shadow of the extinguished candle was fading. All that was left was the smoke, the house, and me, and a decision that couldn't be undone. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Outside, it was raining again, but softly. The storm had passed, only the cleansing rain remained. I went to the window. In the light of the lightning, I saw the lemon tree in the yard. The trunk trembled, bare, but I knew the little bud was still there. I had seen it. The rain spattered my face, cold, but I didn't close the window. I kept watching until a flash lit up the sky and the new leaf shone green in the darkness. See, Helen, I whispered, the storm didn't take everything. It only ripped out what was already rotten. I turned. The whole house seemed to be watching me. The photograph of my wife smiling on the wall. The frames Daniel never finished painting. Helen's favorite chair. All in silence. No reproaches, no advice, just witnesses. Suddenly, the phone vibrated. The screen lit up. Daniel. I let it ring 1, 2, 3 times. Then it stopped. It rang again. Then the messages started coming. Dad, why did you do this? Do you know I'm going to lose everything? I hate you. I read every line without anything inside me stirring. For the first time, those words, I hate you, didn't hurt, because I understood that this rage was just a reflection of his fear. He didn't know yet that sometimes losing everything is the only way to be saved. I put the phone aside and opened the small notebook where I had written, "Today it all begins." I added a new sentence. "Loneliness doesn't hurt when you choose it." I closed the notebook. I poured another glass and went out on the porch. The rain was still falling, no longer cold but gentle, almost like a lullaby. I remembered the words from Helen's letter. When the silence comes, don't fear it. It's the sign that the soul is ready. I looked out into the darkness and exhaled the wine-laced breath. In the corner of the yard, a final flash of lightning lit up the soaked trunk. A drop of water fell from it, and as it caught the light, it shone like a tiny pearl. I smiled. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat there until the rain stopped, until the first rays of dawn pierced the window blinds. When the light touched Helen's face in the photograph, I knew I had crossed the longest night of my life, and that ahead of me, though empty, the first day of freedom was beginning. The morning after the storm dawned a clean, almost unreal blue. The sun filtered through the wet branches and fell on the tiled floor, still stained with water. As I made coffee, I heard the wind on the porch and felt a strange calm, a peace that smelled like freshly washed wood. But peace, I knew, never lasts long. The roar of an engine broke the silence at the gate, followed by the determined clicking of heels. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Jessica. She appeared, impeccable, dressed in beige, her hair pulled back, sunglasses covering most of her face. When she took them off, her eyes were burning with anger. "Do you know Daniel didn't sleep all night? What did you do to him?" "Only what a father has to do," I replied. Her expression froze for a second before she let out a bitter laugh. A father doesn't destroy his son." I set my cup on the table, calm. "I haven't destroyed anyone. I've just stopped letting others use my name and my hard work." Jessica took a step forward, clutching her purse. "You think Daniel doesn't love you? He does everything for you. And I'm just trying to help him." "Help him," I said, looking at her calmly, with a gaze that cut like a blade. "By teaching him that love has a price, that devotion is an investment?" She was silent for a few seconds. Then she spoke in a low, almost pleading voice. "Be honest, Arthur. Are you really leaving everything to the children? They're little. They won't understand." "They'll understand when they grow up," I answered, "and they'll learn, something you never wanted to do." Jessica breathed heavily, trying to maintain her composure. "Daniel is losing everything, you know, his reputation, his job, everything he built. Do you know what they're calling him? The son betrayed by his own father." "And I replied in a low voice, "am the father who was betrayed long ago but who still knows how to forgive." She stood motionless. Her eyes darkened. Her voice trembled. "You're going to die alone, Arthur. No one will be on your side." I smiled serenely. "You're wrong. I've lived alone for the past 8 years, and I've never felt as free as I do now." Jessica swallowed, trying to stay firm. "Daniel is devastated. You have to see him. If you still have any affection left, tell him you'll change your mind." I looked out the window, toward the lemon tree in the yard. Its branches shone in the sun, still, strong. "Affection isn't about giving everything, Jessica. It's about knowing when to say enough when the line is crossed." She fell silent, her lips pressed tight. I walked to the door and opened it, gesturing outside. "If you really love my son, let him get up on his own. Don't push him further just to save your own pride." Jessica stood still for a few seconds before forcing a frosty smile. "You don't understand, Arthur. Daniel was born to win. And you only know how to lose." "There are defeats that are an honor, Jessica," I replied slowly, "especially when they teach others the meaning of humility." She turned with a firm step, her heels clicking against the tiles. I followed her with my gaze until the car disappeared beyond the gate. Then a soft breeze crossed the yard, carrying a faint scent of lemon blossom, the perfume Helen loved so much. I looked up at the sky and murmured, "See, Helen? Your tree is still alive. And maybe, even if they don't understand it yet, I'm coming back to life too." In that instant, I heard a faint rustle. Among the dry branches of the lemon tree, a small white flower had just opened. That afternoon, while I was sweeping the yard, I heard the doorbell. I thought it was a neighbor, so I walked slowly to the door. But it wasn't Jessica or Daniel. Standing at the gate were my 3 grandchildren, lined up, holding hands. The eldest, Nicholas, spoke timidly. "Grandpa, Dad said we should stay here this afternoon. He has things to do." Behind them, the nanny, a young woman with a kind face, nodded. "Mr. Miller, Daniel asked if you could watch them for a few hours." I looked at them, and a strange feeling ran through my chest. It had been a long time since children's laughter echoed in this house. "Come in, little ones," I said, my voice hoarse. The gate opened, and their tiny footsteps pattered on the tiles, striking my heart like soft fingers, touching an old wound. They began to explore everything. The photograph of Helen, the antique clock, the lemon tree in the yard. Matthew, the youngest, pointed to the photo on the wall. "Who is she, Grandpa?" I bent down and stroked his head. "She's your grandmother, Helen. You have her eyes." The boy smiled, and that smile, so pure, pierced me like a light opening a door in my memory. I made orange juice and cookies, just as Helen used to do. The 3 of them sat at the table, eating and laughing as they told me stories from school. Nicholas, the eldest, was quieter, but his gaze followed me with a curiosity that didn't match his age. After a while he asked, "Grandpa, is Dad mad at you?" I froze. "Why do you say that?" "Because when he talks about you, his eyes get sad." I was silent for a few seconds before answering. Sometimes grown-ups get angry not because they hate, but because they love so much they don't know how to say it. The boy nodded thoughtfully. Then he broke his last cookie and offered me half. "Then let's eat together, Grandpa." I laughed, feeling a soft warmth spread through my chest. In the afternoon, they went out to the yard. They gathered twigs from the lemon tree. They played at tossing seeds. Their laughter filled every corner. I watched them from the old wooden chair. The sun filtered through the leaves and painted on their faces a peace I thought I had lost forever. Every laugh from them was a touch of light, fixing something broken inside me. As evening fell, the nanny returned to pick them up. The children hugged me and said goodbye, but Nicholas ran back into the house and left a piece of paper on the table, folded in 4, written in his childish hand. "Grandpa, thanks for the juice and cookies. Dad is sad sometimes, but I think he still loves you. Mom says you're mean, but I don't believe her. Mean people don't make good cookies. I love you, Nicholas." The paper smelled like oranges, as if he'd written it right after drinking his juice. I placed it next to Helen's portrait and murmured, "See, Helen, the seed you planted hasn't died. It just needed a little sun." I looked toward the yard. The lemon tree swayed gently in the breeze, and among its leaves was one more white flower. For the first time in many years, I let out a laugh, not of relief, but because my heart, at last, remembered how to laugh. The sky fell suddenly that afternoon. The west wind brought a damp chill. I was sitting on the porch, reading Nicholas's small note, when I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine stopping at the gate. I didn't have time to get up before I heard violent knocking on the door. "Dad!" Daniel's voice was hoarse, loaded with fury. I opened it slowly. He was there, shirt wrinkled, tie loose, his face gaunt. He still had raindrops in his hair. He walked in without a greeting, without looking around, his eyes fixed on me. "Are you satisfied now? Did you get what you wanted?" I didn't answer. I poured coffee and placed a cup in front of him. "Sit down, Daniel." "I don't want coffee, I want answers," he yelled, his voice breaking. I sat down, my eyes fixed on the steaming cup. "If you've come to reproach me, go ahead, but speak the truth." He laughed bitterly. "Truth? The truth is you took everything from me. The business, the house, the respect. You made me the laughingstock of everyone." I looked up. "I didn't take anything from you, son. I just recovered what you had lost. Dignity." His face flushed. "Dignity? You can't live on that. Your time is over. In this world, the strongest wins." I smiled tiredly. "And you think winning is everything? Maybe I failed in teaching you because you learned to fear losing, but never to bow your head when it's necessary." He slammed the table. The cup shattered, and the coffee spread like blood on the wood. I didn't flinch. Our eyes met. In his, the storm of a lost son. In mine, the exhaustion of a father who has endured too much. You destroyed me, he whispered. No, Daniel. Your own arrogance did. Silence filled the house. Outside, thunder rumbled and the rain began to fall. Daniel took a few steps toward the door and stopped. You don't get it. I just wanted you to acknowledge me. I saw his back, and in it, the shadow of the boy who once held my hand in the woodshop. I did acknowledge you, son, I said softly, but you preferred the world's applause to your father's nod. He turned to me, his eyes misty. Jessica was right. You only know how to control. You never let me live. I sighed. I just wanted you to not forget your roots. But if you call that control, then today, I'm setting you free. I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. You can hate me, but don't hate yourself. Because if you do that, you'll lose everything. Daniel looked at me, torn between rage and pain. And you still believe you're always right? No, I replied in a low voice. I made a mistake. I made a mistake by loving you in silence, but I'm not being silent anymore. He stood still for a few seconds. Then he covered his face with his hands and turned toward the door. He opened it, and the rain burst in violently. Do you want to win, Dad? Is that what you want? No, son, I answered. I just want you to learn how to get up. Daniel walked out. His figure dissolved under the curtain of water. I followed him with my gaze without resentment, only tenderness. A flash of lightning lit up the yard. The lemon tree, soaked, shone in the rain. On one of its branches, a new bud was beginning to open. I smiled faintly. Storms pass, son. They always do. That night the rain kept falling, persistent, soft, as if to accompany the silence Daniel had left behind. I couldn't sleep. The house was submerged in a dense stillness, barely interrupted by the whistling of the wind slipping through the cracks and the ticking of the clock marking its slow rhythm. I sat at the table, under the dim light of the lamp, looking at the photograph of Helen. In her eyes, I always found what I had tried to flee from for years: the truth. I opened the old drawer looking for my notebook and accidentally brushed against a small wooden box she used to keep letters in. I hadn't touched it since her death. The lid was stuck, but when I managed to open it, a scent of aged paper and dried lavender spread like a familiar breath. Inside were photos, some folded papers, and an envelope tied with a red ribbon. On the front, her slanted, soft handwriting said, "For Arthur and Daniel. When time separates you, let these words unite you." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were 2 letters, each tied with a different colored thread, one blue and one yellow. I knew instantly which one was mine. Blue, Helen used to say, was the color of your eyes when you're at peace. I opened the letter addressed to me. Arthur, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side. You'll be sad, I know, but don't let the sadness harden you. You have a beautiful heart. You just hide it too well. You love in silence, and our son loves loudly. It's the same love, just in a different language. When Daniel gets angry, don't be afraid of him. Rage is the voice of a heart that hasn't learned to speak yet. Let him yell and answer him with memory. Remember when he was a boy, and you taught him that there's no break that can't be mended. I trust that if you open your heart, he'll find his way back to you. Loving isn't enduring everything, it's knowing when to stop, to teach what's valuable. I read slowly, word by word. By the last line, tears were streaming down my face without my realizing it. I wiped them away and picked up the second letter. It was for Daniel. I hesitated. My pulse was pounding, but I finally opened it. My son, if you are reading these words, it means I'm gone, and that your father has perhaps lost himself in loneliness. Son, your father loves you more than he can say. Some men were raised to believe that loving is sacrificing in silence, and so they forget how to say, "I love you." If you see him cold one day, don't believe the appearance. Inside, he's just scared of losing you. Don't let pride make you blind. Look at his hands. They are the same ones that lifted you up even when he himself was falling. And if you ever forget who he is, go back to the wood shop. Breathe in the smell of the wood, because in it you'll find the love your father left for you. I couldn't hold back the sobs. Each sentence was like Helen's hand resting on my shoulder, firm and soft at the same time. I folded both letters carefully. I tied them again with the red ribbon and pressed them against my chest. I sat there for a long time that night, with a single thought pounding inside me. Daniel had to read this letter. Not so he would forgive me, but so he would remember the love he had buried under his pride. I looked out at the yard. The rain had stopped, and drops still glittered on the leaves like tiny mirrors. The lemon tree stood motionless, and the white flowers trembled in the breeze. "Tomorrow, Helen," I whispered, "I'll give him your letter. Maybe this is what I should have done from the beginning. Let you be the one to speak for me in the language of love." The next morning dawned clear after the rain. The early sun filtered through the branches, spilling onto the porch in soft golden lines. I got up before dawn, made a fresh pot of coffee, and sat at the table. The envelope tied with the red ribbon rested there. Inside, the two letters lay still. But I felt like they were breathing. Helen was still present in every word, in every breath of the dawn. I knew what I had to do. I dressed calmly, put the letter for Daniel in the inside pocket of my jacket, and left. The morning breeze brushed my face, carrying the faint perfume of the lemon blossoms. The lemon tree had bloomed again, with small white flowers that shone like the light of forgiveness. I stroked one of the branches and murmured, "You're coming with me today, Helen." Daniel's house wasn't far. I walked. That familiar path I'd avoided for years now seemed peaceful, almost new. When I arrived, Jessica opened the door. Her face was pale, her eyes marked by exhaustion. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice harsh. "I've come to see my son," I replied softly. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. "He's in his study." Daniel appeared in the doorway. He was wearing a partially unbuttoned shirt and the beginnings of a beard. He froze when he saw me. There was no anger left in his eyes, just exhaustion. "Did you come to say something else, Dad?" His voice was hoarse. I took the envelope out of my pocket and held it out to him. "I didn't come to talk. I came to give you this." He looked at the envelope without taking it. "What is it?" "A letter from your mother." Silence filled the room. Only the ticking of the clock and our breathing could be heard, the breaths of two men who had loved the same woman in different ways. Finally, Daniel reached out his hand. As he touched the envelope, I noticed his fingers trembling. "Did you read it?" "Mine, yes, this one. Your mother wrote it for you. Read it, but read it alone. And when you're done, don't call me. Don't ask questions, just think." He said nothing. He just nodded slowly. In his eyes, I saw a damp shimmer. It wasn't regret, maybe fear. Fear of facing the tenderness of a mother who was gone. I turned toward the door. As I grabbed the doorknob, I heard his voice, low, broken. "Dad." I stopped. "Thank you." Two brief words, but they opened a door inside me. I didn't turn around, I just nodded. "Don't thank me. Thank your mother." Outside, the sun hit my eyes, and I had to squint. Birds were singing on the roof, and I felt that the air was lighter. That afternoon, I sat under the lemon tree. The wind moved the branches, spreading the sweet aroma all over the yard. I imagined Daniel reading the letter, his face when he reached the last line where Helen had written, "And if you ever feel lost, son, don't look for someone to blame. Look at the sky and remember that we both love you." I closed my eyes. In the warm breeze, I heard Helen's laugh, light as the tinkling of wind chimes. "See, Helen," I whispered, "I've done it. Now the rest is up to time. Let time be the one to tell him what we no longer could." 3 days have passed since I delivered the letter. I haven't received any calls. I'm not expecting any. In this small house, everything has returned to its slow rhythm, making coffee in the morning, sweeping the yard, sitting on the porch in the afternoon to watch the clouds. But something has changed. Every day, the lemon tree in the yard has more flowers. Small, white, scattered among the branches with a soft aroma that reminds me of Helen's voice when she was still alive. On the afternoon of the third day, while I was carving wood in the wood shop, I heard a car stop at the gate. I thought it was the delivery man, but when I went out, I saw Daniel. He He was no longer wearing a suit and tie. He wore a simple shirt, his face tired but more serene. In his eyes there was no anger or fear. There was something else. Calm. I stood still, saying nothing. He walked forward slowly, like someone returning to a place whose scent he had forgotten. "Dad," he said in a hoarse voice, "I read it." I nodded. There was no need to ask what he had read. There was only one letter that mattered. Daniel looked around the woodshop. He ran his hand over the table, over the chair I was repairing. "The smell is still the same," he murmured, "just like in my memories." "Because memories don't change, son. We just change." He sat across from me. The afternoon light came through the door, gilding his face. "Mom wrote so much," he said, holding back emotion. "She said you didn't know how to say, 'I love you,' but that you knew how to love your own way. She said, 'I'm like you. Only I haven't learned to forgive yet.'" I nodded with a faint smile. "Your mother was always right." Daniel looked up, his eyes red. "Dad, I'm sorry." Those two words were as soft as a sigh, but they carried the weight of a falling mountain. I didn't answer right away. I stood up, walked over to him, and put my hand on his shoulder. It was trembling a little, but it was firm. "You don't have to apologize, son. I failed too. We just forgot how to talk. That's all." A moment of silence passed. Then Daniel said, "Jessica went to her mother's house. I guess she needs time." I nodded. Time is the only teacher that teaches what words cannot. We said no more. The wind came through the window, carrying the sweet scent of the blooming lemon tree. "Dad," he continued, "when I read Mom's letter, I remembered something. When I was a kid, I broke the chair you made for her. You got so mad, but a few days later you fixed it. You didn't make a new one." "Why?" I looked at him and smiled. "Because the old cracks still held the warmth of the hands that had touched it. Repairing isn't erasing, Daniel. It's remembering." He lowered his head, nodding in silence. We stayed like that, father and son, without any more words. There was no distance between us anymore, only the smell of wood, of sweat, and of the opening lemon blossoms. A petal fell onto my hand. Daniel watched it and smiled. "The lemon tree is alive again, isn't it, Dad?" "Not just the tree, son. We are too." The sun was setting, painting the yard in gold. In that instant, I knew Helen was there, smiling in silence, and I thought I heard her voice on the wind. "You did it, Arthur. You did it." Yes, I had done it. Weeks later, the house seemed different, not the furniture, but the air, lighter, clearer, full of voices and laughter. Daniel came by often, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. He'd help me fix the woodshop roof, or change light bulbs, or he'd just sit with me and drink coffee in silence, like before. We spoke little, but every word was true. There was no need for explanations or apologies anymore. The silence between father and son had stopped being a wall. It was now a bridge. One afternoon, after Daniel had left, I stayed on the porch, watching his figure disappear beyond the gate. The evening wind blew softly, carrying the clean, sweet scent of the lemon blossoms. The lemon tree was covered in new leaves that shone under the golden sun. I thought Helen must be there, on one of those branches, smiling. I went into the house and took out the last candle left from that birthday. The candle Daniel wished I would never blow out again. It was deformed, shorter, but it still had enough wax to burn. I placed it in the center of the table, next to Helen's letter and Nicholas's note. On the wall hung the old photograph of the three of us. Helen, Daniel as a boy, and me. All three of us smiling. I lit the candle. The small flame flickered, filling the room with a warm, soft light, like that of memories. I poured a glass of wine and raised it slowly. "Thank you, Helen," I whispered, "for teaching me that loving isn't just holding on, but also knowing when to let go. Thank you for leaving words capable of making two stubborn men cry and love again." I took a sip and sighed. The wind slipped through the window and the flame leaned, casting my trembling shadow on the wall, old, thin, but at peace. Outside, the children were running around the lemon tree. Their laughter was the new heartbeat of the house, finally awakened from a long sleep. I took my old pen and opened the black notebook, where, long ago, I had written the first sentence of this journey. On the last page, I added, Don't feel guilty for being late to love. It's always worth it. I closed the notebook and watched the candle. Its light reflected in my eyes, blurring the line between the present and memory. Son, I murmured, if one day I'm gone, don't cry, because love, when it's real, stays. In the smell of the wood, in the wind, in the lemon blossoms. The candle burned to the end. The wick sparked and went out. A thin line of smoke rose, floating slowly in the twilight. I followed it with my gaze, my heart as calm as a still lake. Outside, Daniel was laughing with his children, his voice mixing with the wind. I closed my eyes and smiled. In the dimness, I clearly heard Helen's voice, soft, transparent as the first day I met her. You can rest now, Arthur. Everything's all right. And I knew then that this was the last candle. Not the candle of an end, but of a new beginning. If this story captivated you, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left of the screen. Thanks for watching, for visiting my channel.